Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Miranda and I will be your Enchantress of Avalon, taking you on a magical journey into the lands mystical and into Avalon. So for today's Mermaid Monday video, which is a thing that I first started doing on YouTube, Mermaid Mondays, Fairy Fridays, Siren Saturdays, to just be able to theme out things that I was posting on Twitter. I started that on Twitter, and then I do sometimes use the Mermaid Monday and Fairy Friday, Siren Saturday on my blog as well. So I started using it here for all of these fairy-centric videos, as so many of my things are. I am a big scholar of all things fairy. I like to write about it, I like to talk about it, I like to embody it in my daily life. I have an entire video on living the fairy life for anyone who's interested in that. So for today's Mermaid Monday video, I'm going to be talking about Melusine, which is the French version of her name. She's also known as Melusina in German versions of her tale. And no matter what version you go with, the basic plot of her story stays relatively consistent, which is really great. First of all, I'm going to just start with her mother and then go on. Basically, her mother was a fairy woman from Avalon who met and married a mortal man, and she had told him upon their marriage that the only thing she would ask of him was that when they had children, he was not to be present when she was bathing their children. And he agreed. He thought it was weird, but he agreed. And then, of course, eventually he gets very curious and he comes in to watch to see why he can't watch her bathe their children. And he finds out that they're fairies, and this is why. Like, his wife is a fairy, his daughters are fairies, and things like, they mermaid tails come out and things like that when they're being bathed, which is why she didn't want him around. So, of course, because she's been betrayed by her husband, she leaves and runs off and takes her daughters to Avalon with her. And so when Melusine is old enough to understand what has transpired and how her father betrayed their mother, she decides to rally her sisters and try to kill him. She plots to kill her own father because of the fact that he betrayed their mother and that he seems to be unaccepting of this whole idea that they're fairies. Like, why should you care? They're magical. I mean, it is pretty insulting. So she goes extreme and decides she wants to kill their father. This plot really never takes place, never actually gets enacted. But because of the plot having been, designed at all, they get punished. Specifically, Melusine gets punished. And her punishment is that she will have to spend every Saturday in her fairy form, which is a mermaid form. She's a water fairy. So she either has, in some versions of the story, she has a serpent's tail that comes out, and in other versions, it's a more traditional mermaid's tail, or even a double mermaid tail. So she, kind of accepts this punishment, and she also begins being a lady of the fountain. And a lady of the fountain is someone who protects holy fonts in different areas. And she is at this holy font where she's supposed to be protecting it when she meets a man named Raymond, and he is a count in either Germany or France. I'm going to say France to make things a little easier, as some of the most well-known versions of the tale are French. So Raymond is a French count, and when he meets her, in most versions of the tale, he has just accidentally killed someone. I believe it was his uncle in most tellings. I think in some others it's a cousin, but we'll go with uncle. He's just killed his uncle, and he feels an extreme amount of guilt. But he also feels an extreme attraction to her and doesn't really know why, but he knows he must marry her. So she helps him, and then he goes about his business, and then he comes back for her and proposes marriage, and she accepts with this prerequisite: like her mother before her, she has one specific demand. And her specific demand is that you cannot see me on Saturdays. Saturdays have to be my day to myself. And again, he thinks it's weird, but he accepts because he's in love with her. And so they get married, and he doesn't see her on Saturdays. And their marriage goes quite well for many years. They have many children together. Melusine actually is brilliant at designing architectural structures. So she designs these beautiful palaces and castles all through his lands. And they seem to be pretty happy with one another, accepting the fact that each of their children has been born with a weird sort of deformity. But they get over that, and they just seem happy together for a long time. Eventually, though, Raymond's family starts asking, well, why can't you see her on Saturday? This is really weird. What if she's cheating on you? What if this? What if that? What if she's plotting against you? Like, all of these crazy things that they instill in him that get him incredibly, incredibly paranoid. And this paranoia drives him to break his promise to Melusine. He spies on her on Saturday and sees that she's in this big pool of water, this big tub of water, and he sees her tail, and he gets very freaked out. And from here, this is where the story does play out one of two different ways. In many versions of the tale, he doesn't do anything about it for a long time. He just kind of keeps it to himself, thinks it's weird, but you know what? She's still a great wife. She's a good mother. She's a great, female house, like, manager of the house, which is a big feminine duty. And she's made all these great architectural structures, and she's done so much. So he lets it off. There are other versions where he immediately confronts her. But in any case, no matter when he confronts her, eventually he feels he needs to confront this issue. And in the most common versions, he confronts her due to something one of their sons does. One of their sons is very rebellious and has a bit of an antisocial temperament, and he has recently pretty much destroyed a church. And again, this was written by Christian clerics, so this was a big deal that he did this. And that is what makes Raymond finally say, oh, well, the reason our sons are acting like monsters is that you're a monster, and you're a fish, you're a snake, and all this other stuff. At that point, Melusine knows what he's done. He's spied on her, and he knows the truth of her nature. A truth that she didn't want him to know. She wanted to keep it private and keep her fairy nature private from him. So she does what any fairy woman would upon exposure like this and upon a breaking of a vow. This is very important in all different fairy stories, especially of fairy brides. She leaves him. She immediately leaves him, and their marriage is over. Well, she leaves him, but she's still a mother. She doesn't leave her children, really. She still comes to visit them when Raymond's not around, at night and when he's traveling and such. And specifically later, after, the family has moved on and more generations have been born. Melusine is immortal, being a fairy woman, and living in Avalon, she's immortal. So she still comes back to watch over her descendants, and she becomes a bit of a banshee-like figure. I did mention this in my Anya video, that Melusine is known to have been like this banshee-like figure to members of her own family. And banshees are usually linked to a specific family, where she would wail and scream and cry when one of her descendants would be dying, ready to die. She would do that, and this would mean, oh, okay, this person is going to die. Melusine is telling us this and preparing us for it. And it's a really unique and interesting thing. Now, what's more unique is that there are actual castles and palaces that still exist today in France that are said to have been built by Melusine. And she's one of the fairy queen figures who many royals and important historical figures claim descent from. It's kind of ironic because she's often portrayed in her story as being a monstrous figure, and that her son was a monstrous figure, yet these actual royals were pretty gung-ho about claiming descent from her. And famously, there were Plantagenet kings who claimed descent from her, and very specifically, it's even used in fiction about this particular figure. Elizabeth Woodville, through her mother Jacquetta, who was the Duchess of Bedford, and of royal descent herself, was said to have been, in fact, a descendant of Melusine. And they proudly claimed this descent. And also, the descent from Melusine is why both Jacquetta and Elizabeth Woodville, when she was Queen of England, were accused of witchcraft. Accused of working witchcraft either individually or together to seduce the king into marrying Elizabeth, who wasn't of royal descent through her father, because of Jacquetta marrying a simple squire who was noble, and that he was a noble person, but he was just a squire. He was, a knight, not anyone of actual title. He was given the title Lord Rivers as kind of a way of, this former Duchess of Bedford, when she was widowed, married this man who was so beneath her, so let's give him a title. Well, because of this, Elizabeth Woodville is always seen as, a commoner, because her father was. Her mother never was, though. And it was through that lineage that Melusine descent was claimed. Now, again, they proudly claimed this descent, and it's a lot of what makes those accusations of witchcraft have a little bit of merit to the medieval audience, because, well, they're descended from a fairy woman. People call this woman a goddess, but she's also a fairy woman. This is magic. So why wouldn't they be able to wield magic? And maybe they did wield magic. It's a possibility, but Jacquetta was put on trial twice on accusations of witchcraft, and both times acquitted. She would have been killed if she was found guilty, of course, but acquitted of those witchcraft charges twice. And Elizabeth Woodville was never put on trial. She was a queen, and there was no actual evidence that she had done anything wrong, other than, having a paranoid brother-in-law who kept saying, oh, well, no, she's the reason my wife is dead, and she's the reason my wife miscarried this baby. She's the reason my wife died in childbirth later. George, Duke of Clarence, did make those accusations against her, and in fact would go on to plot to kill both her and his own brother, the king, which only ended up in George, Duke of Clarence getting executed himself for high treason, because this could not be overlooked. And funnily enough, it's a very famous historical story. It is very true, though. George, Duke of Clarence, died by method of his choice, and he chose to be drowned to death in a cask of Malmsey wine. He was known to be a drunk in life, and he went out like one in death. So anyway, as I said, though, I just tied that story in because of the connection with Melusine and the fact that they were claiming descent from her. That was a very common thing. A lot of people did it. So I hope that you have found this video interesting. If you did like it, please like and subscribe, comment. It really does make my day to receive any sort of feedback from you. And please also go over to my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life, for more of my content. Have a great day. Bye now.